Hi everybody, Professor Benelou with the second and final video regarding your Unit 4 discussion board. Here I will be discussing all four topics that you can delve into for this assignment. The first is the Reaganomics topic. The primary document you're going to be analyzing is an interview with President Reagan. First of all, let me explain Reaganomics. Reagan was sworn into office January 1981, and the inflation and slow economic growth that had plagued both Ford and Carter was still gripping the nation. Reagan was determined to increase the spending money every American had, so he instituted what was called Reaganomics. Basically, cut taxes for the wealthy, and was his belief, and the wealth will trickle down to the lower and middle class. Reagan was a proponent of smaller government. He felt that middle class would benefit from more simplified tax codes. He cut about $41 billion for the federal budget, from the federal budget, and much of that was to the detriment of social programs that had been set up during the Great Society in the 1960s. Supply side economics is part of Reaganomics. It's the belief that if you cut taxes for big businesses and corporations, then the wealth will trickle down. So that's Reaganomics. The Tax Equity and Responsibility Act, which is covered in the interview you will read, this closed the tax loopholes and restricted benefits in pension plans. And this was Reagan's way of dealing with the national debt without having to raise taxes. It helped out somewhat, but not as much as hoped. The gap between the rich and the poor continued to grow through Reagan's time in office. He did not increase minimum wage during his presidency, and federal funding for things like firefighters, policemen, and education were all cut during his term in office. Single mothers in African American households saw the biggest decline in income during Reaganomics. And in 1984, I can't talk today, Reagan further slashed the tax rates for the wealthy, causing an even larger federal deficit. And the deficit would really grow during his second term of office, because during his second term, he was very focused on military spending, defense spending, and particularly his Star Wars program. Okay, the second topic you can choose from is the Gulf War. August 2nd, 1990, Iraqi forces invaded and took over Kuwait. Kuwait's a very oil-rich nation. President George H.W. Bush demanded the withdrawal of Iraqi forces. Saudi Arabia allowed UN coalition forces. Okay, because remember, the United States was the head of United Nations coalition forces during the first Gulf War. So we had the backing of the international community. And we based our operation out of Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis were more than happy to let us into their country, because they figured, well, the Iraqis were taking over the Kuwaitis. Well, heck, they would be next. So anyway, they're also a very oil-rich nation, Saudi Arabia. Since the U.S. had previously been an ally of Iraq, Saddam Hussein felt that he could take over Kuwait and we wouldn't intervene. Well, he was mistaken. Coalition forces quickly liberated Kuwait and headed into Iraq. Even though the coalition forces had won the war, Saddam Hussein remained in power. President George H.W. Bush spoke before the United Nations General Assembly on October 1st, 1990. This speech occurred approximately 2 months after the invasion of Kuwait. Bush condemned the Iraqi aggression, and called for members of the United Nations to demand the return of Kuwait. He said the United Nations could aid nations to band together to prevent aggression and punish those responsible. So that's the second topic. The third topic is the rise of conservatism, where you will be reading the speech that Pat Buchanan made to the Republican National Convention in the summer of 1992. August 17, 1992 to be exact, Buchanan gave this speech supporting the re-election campaign of President George H.W. Bush at the Republican National Convention. He talks about what he calls the culture war. What was the culture war? What topics was he talking about? He then states how George H.W. Bush is the right man to lead the nation through its difficulties. That's the third topic. The fourth and final topic is tear down this wall speech. Remember, Reagan started his career out as an actor. He was called the great communicator, and that is not for nothing. He was a brilliant speech giver, okay? He's probably arguably the best speech givers on the Republican side. Franklin Roosevelt, you can say, is probably one of the best speech givers for the Democrats. But anyway, Reagan gave the speech in front of the Berlin Wall in June of 1987. During the speech, he urged an end to the Cold War and the spread of democracy through the nations under communist rule. He emphasized the hardships that Berliners had to endure since the wall had been built in 1961. The dismantling of the wall began in November 1989 with the collapse of the communist East German government. The economy in East Germany had been on the decline. Soviet Premier Gorbachev urged the East Germans to impose economic reforms like he did in the Soviet Union. Many East Germans were flocking to embassies requesting to be let into West Germany. November of 1989, the East German leader Erich Honecker resigned, and East Germans were let into West Germany. The wall was dismantled, and Germany was reunified. So those are the 4 topics that you can go over for Unit 4 discussion board. As always, I'm here for you. You can stop by my office hours. You can message me through CTU Messenger or email me. Remember, there's no question that is silly, just the one you do not ask. Good luck, everybody.